Alrighty, let's get back to another matchup. This time with a slightly different setup than what you are used to on our channel. But big thanks to the organizers of the Czech Duel Commander Championship for providing me their content so I can have a nice recast for you guys and give you some insights on my matchup here, my feature matchup against Aragorn. As you see, I was playing Aragorn, my opponent was also playing Aragorn. That's usually quite an interesting matchup. He told me prior to the match that he has no experience with the mirror match. I was playing a couple of times already, and it's also a matchup that you should be prepared for because you really have to know what you have to do in order to get the lead here. Also, big thanks to Jan and Yuri for casting that event. I think they did quite a good job. I don't know if you guys are experienced with casting events, but if this was the first time, it was definitely great. So big compliment from my side. But let's get back to the matchup. So my opponent was starting the game with a Surveillant turn 1. That's a common play that you see these days. I was actually playing a fetch land, which resulted in a Surveillant. Nothing too spectacular. I think I had a Daze, I had a True Nemesis in my hand, something around that. And TNN is a card, if I get to resolve it, it gives me quite a good advantage in this particular matchup because Aragorn usually don't have, or Aragorn lists don't have that many interaction slots to deal with a TNN that's already resolved. Here my opponent is trying to take the lead by resolving a White Plume Adventurer. Lucky for me, he has no Force of Will to protect the cast or something similar. A Daze wouldn't do it here because I had 1 mana open. But yeah, he's trying, and I was lucky to have the Force Spike ready. If he would manage to get it through, even if I can handle the White Plume, I have to make sure to get back the initiative at some point, and that could already, open a sub-game, as it's always the case with initiative cards. So I surveil for myself, get rid of a land. I had quite a few lands in hand. And here is actually not a window to cast TNN yet, because my opponent could bring down Aragorn next turn, and I still want to prevent that. Although he was tapped out, I think I also had another interaction spell in hand, so I thought, okay, let's give it some time. If he tries to resolve Aragorn, I can counter it, or I can even ignore it. I think I even had a Skyclave Apparition in hand. But instead of Aragorn, he casts Pyroglyph, which, I have the Daze for, and I thought, well, he had no interaction to fight the White Plume, so I'm rather sure he has nothing to defend the Pyroglyph on stack now. So I was pretty confident in playing the Daze for mana instead of returning an island, and also because I don't want to go back at decrease my land count in comparison to him that much, because that would be a difference of 2 lands if he hits a land drop next turn, and then I might be in trouble getting behind. So as I said, I just fetch. I was looking into the brainstorm for a better solution. I think I didn't find any. No, I couldn't find any, and there is the Daze, which resolves, so the Pyroglyph is in graveyard. And now it's my turn to try to turn the tide. And here, the Fury was somewhat sticked to the volcanic island when I shuffled it. I just pointed out to my opponent that it randomly appeared, and we agreed on just reshuffling the card into the deck. Gives him the information that there is no Fury in hand, which is a bit of it's a minor downside for me, but it's not too bad. So here I go for the TNN cast, which luckily resolves. On the other hand, if there would be some interaction, I'm pretty sure he would have tried to defend the Pyroglyph. And as I said, it's very hard to deal with that unless you have the new Rav or the Energy Wrath or a Council's Judgment in your deck, Jeskai can't really do much about a TNN. If you're facing red decks, black decks actually, you have to expect Toxic Deluge, Edict Effects, and other cards like Sweepers. Is there anything else? Let me just... Apart from that, I don't think so. The only thing that could come up is... But that's actually a card that's not good enough anymore for Aragorn. When you try to block a creature in combat and they play Stomp, this is the 2 mana a damage spell from the Bonecrusher Giant, which says damage can't be prevented, then your TNN would actually die. But as I said, Bonecrusher Giant itself is not good enough anymore, so I doubt he features that card. Here of the Skyclave Apparition, taking care of Aragorn, I took over the Monarch, and from that point on, my situation on my board looked quite good. So it seems, I'm not sure if there's a land drop. I think there was a land drop. I think he played the Razor Grass Ambush. That's a card that I also tested for some time, but I think it's not good enough for Aragorn actually, because Sink into Super is a very, very good card actually. If we're talking about the new Modern Horizons 3 flip cards or MDFCs, because it's very versatile. You can bounce threats, you can bounce spells, and blue is a main color, so is white, so it's not about the color, but I don't really want to wait for my opponent to block or attack with their threats before I can get rid of them. So I thought Unexpectedly Absent, for example, is a better home. I'm a big fan of the card. I know that some people don't like it because it costs white, but I think that's actually not a problem in this deck. You're basically splashing red. It's not that much of a... If you have a look at my list, of course I play more red cards than just splashing red, but red is the color with the least percentage. So here we go. He tried to cast a Hullbreacher, which I reprieved, and then he did a small mistake, which could be crucial. Instead of playing the Mastermind in response to reprieve, which drew me my second card this turn, he let the reprieve resolve, let me draw the card, and then he cast the Mastermind, which I had a mana type for all the time. So the casters were speculating whether or not the reprieve gifted me the mana type. That was not the case. But yeah, nonetheless, it was a mistake because that was a free draw for him. He could have... or at least he could have tried to have a free draw, let's say, like this. So here is another land drop. Casting Aragorn on his side is not really the best play. Tapping out and leaving your opponent with 7 mana open if you are behind is kind of dangerous. On the other hand, you have to try to get back. The thing is, with True Nemesis, your opponent doesn't get any life, and they almost certainly don't get back the Monarch, because you can just leave open a TNN, and as long as you're the Monarch, they can't use the trigger to target the TNN, so you can just always block Aragorn, they won't get through, and they won't get any Monarch, unless they have more creatures on board than you, or something like this, in order to break the synergy here. So my Skyclave is trading with Malcolm. I think that's a fine trade. We know about the Hullbreacher that might come up soon. And apart from that, I think I'm in quite a good spot. So here my idea is to cast Aragorn. If it resolves and stays on board, I have a unblockable combat step next turn. And since I know about the Hullbreacher, I can bring down a creature that could block a Hullbreacher itself. I mean, of course, they can go for Aragorn cast next turn, but I think still I'm in the good spot, because then I can target Aragorn. Hullbreacher needs to block Aragorn. I have my TNN that goes through, and I don't get any life. Apart from that, I think I had a Pyroglyph in hand, which was waiting to get bigger and bigger. At that point, it's a 3-power creature only. But here is a portable hole joining the graveyard, so it gets a bit bigger. I think it's sorcery is actually missing on both sides. So right now it's a 4/5. So it would deal 4 damage. That's just not enough. My opponent decides to cast Aragorn. I lose the Monarch. And here is a small mistake. They tap their mana incorrectly. That's why they have to use the treasure token to cast the Lithomantic Barrage. Usually you would always try to keep the treasure tokens for as long as possible, because that's just free mana that you want to use only in the necessary situation. And we see that he has 1 mana open, so that could have been different. But here's my Pyroglyph, deals 5 damage, because now with the Lithomantic Barrage there is a sorcery joining the graveyard, and that seals the deal, and we go over to game 2. And here we see Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes on the right side. I think they talked about it in between of these 2 rounds, and if you have a look at my list, you will see that I don't play either of them, simply because I think those cards are not very well represented, or no, that's not the right way. I think they simply don't fit the deck. I don't want to have more or less useless 1-drops. If I would decide to go for one of those 2, it's obviously Mother of Runes, but I think the creature density is not high enough, and mostly those cards are rather useless. I think the deck needs to play more important slots, so I'm happy without them. But we see many lists every now and then that feature those cards. Both having a Restless Anchorage, that's also a card that I'm rather skeptical about. I mean, you have to pay 1 less mana in comparison to the Colonnade, but you also deal 2 less damage, and the map token is mostly irrelevant. Really depends on your board, because you can only make use of it when you have a creature on board. That's not always the case. I mean, of course, you can activate it, and then you can use a map token and target the anchorage and grow it. That would be an ideal case, but, well, here is a TNN, and I did a very crucial mistake on that moment. I was kind of distracted for a split second. Didn't think about why he would play the Failure in response. The only logical reason would be to play a Daze on its own. And I think if I would have just taken the time to think about that for a second and Daze the Daze as it was intended, I could have taken the lead here, again with the True Name Nemesis. Because without anything on board, Failure can't blink anything, it can't attack because it will be blocked by TNN. And also I had a portable hole in hand, so this was a terrible play by my side. But game goes on, and I have to find my way through. Not sure if I hit the land drop here. Actually, the reason I kept the hand was the Tithe. Being on the draw with Tithe is actually quite good, because then you get to search for 2 lands instead of only 1. My opponent had a Spell Pierce, so no more lands for me. Here's the portable hole trying to deal with the Fairy Mastermind, and I think he countered that, which is a bit of an interesting decision, but I can also understand it. I mean, he has the lead, he has something I have to deal with. Fairy Mastermind is not too scary, but still, it's okay. You take care of that. There could be a more dangerous threat for 2 mana that I could bring up, which could be, for example, Ajani. That's probably the most dangerous threat if I think about it, for 2 mana. Nonetheless, it's still fine, I guess. Then he can cast Aragorn next turn, and we go over to a game in which every one of us is trying to develop more and more board. Here is a very welcomed Surveil of Flage. That's, yeah, quite a good target to surveil, and he also has enough cards in graveyard to cast it right away, I think. But he's a bit hesitating whether or not to do that. He could also cast Aragorn. I think he just passed the turn. Actually, I had a Normalize in my hand too, which would be a great counterspell for the Flage, obviously. I missed the land drop. Luckily, my opponent activates the Mastermind, and I can flash in my Hull Breacher to draw a card and also get a treasure token that not really compensates my missed land drop, but still, I get mana, I get to draw cards, and they do not. And it also kind of negates the Aragorn cast. So now there would be a window to cast Flage, but still, my opponent seems to be very passive. And they're kind of scared. I mean, now having no backup, of course, there could be a wash away. There could be Monotype and Force Spike with a 5th land drop is not a threat. So it's basically only wash away or a Force of Will, actually. So I would have definitely gone for the Flage, trying to apply much more pressure when I have the window to do that. Instead, they choose to go for the Restless Anchorage, which is also fine, but it's definitely the much more conservative play. I think they could have capitalized way better on that turn. But okay. I mean, sure, Flage. What's the worst outcome? The worst outcome would be I deal with your Hull Breacher. I can cast my Aragorn, make use of Monarch, and maybe Flage is dealt with. Maybe it's bounced. That would be good. It's exile, that would be bad. And if I have Unholy Heat, for example, which is not even online because I have only creature and instant in my graveyard, well, then it's just return to graveyard and I can maybe cast it later. But okay, here I have a Chain Lightning to deal with the Fairy, and yet I thought, okay, I have to keep up the Normalize because unless I have 7 mana on board, I can still handle the Flage. Now I have a window again to interact with it. But still, they do not decide to go for that. And right now, it's not the time anymore to swing in with the Manland because I'm dealing 3 damage a turn. They are dealing only 2 damage a turn. So, yeah. You get my point, I guess. But let's see. Probably still thinking about the Flage cast. Now not very attractive with 4 mana open in comparison to last turn. So he goes for the Restless Anchorage activation again. And I didn't present any interaction for that land the last turn. And I had a sorcery interaction for the Fairy. So he's pretty safe to activate the map. And yeah, finds another land. Decides that it enters tapped. And he passes the turn. And that's, yeah, now he's completely tapped out. I think with 13 HP, I mean, we can debate about whether or not you let this Hallowed Fountain enter untapped, even if it's just bluffing a removal. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't look too good for him. So right now, I kind of feel good in that situation. But I still know there is the Flage lurking around and I have to deal with it at some point. Delirium is a thing. So the reason why I binned my Brainstorm was that I wanted to hit a 6 land drop because that would allow me to cast Aragorn, swing in, and still have the Normalize open for a potential Flage cast. Unfortunately, that was not the case. So I'm still down on 4 lands only. And my opponent was lucky enough to find the 7th land, which could finally make a Flage cast possible, I would say. Let's see. The Aragorn cast is not too spectacular due to the fact that I have Hullbreacher on board. Now that he has 7 mana, it's my Normalize lost some value with all that mana. And I think I didn't have any other counterspell available. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. But well, there is a Pyrogoyf hitting the battlefield. That's another card that you can play for 4, and it actually makes sense because before he's reducing his graveyard, he wants to make sure that the Pyrogoyf hits the maximum damage. And I have to let that resolve because Normalize doesn't deal with it. But I think I have... Did I have an interaction spell? I'm not too sure, to be honest. Oh, I did. I had a Swords now. So actually, if he would decide to go for a Restless Anchorage activation in that very turn, this would be absolutely insane. So dealing with the Anchorage, he gets rid of 1 land and basically would waste a whole turn. That was actually a right decision to not go for the manland again. I think I don't want to say he wasted a few turns already with that, but yeah, the situation could look way different already. So still trying to find something. I finally got my land, and I think I had my own Pyrogoyf again. So as in the first game, it kind of comes down to who has the better Pyrogoyf available. And now this would also deal 5 damage. The question is whether or not I will get through Flage. Probably not. I think it's at 5. No, it's actually only 4. So it's not too crazy. But still, a 4-5 is fine. There is a Reprieve. And as you know, as I said, I have the Normalize for the Reprieve. But there's a Mana Tithe, and my opponent decides to Mana Tithe the Normalize and gives me a draw for the Reprieve, which is also a mistake because you could instead just target the Pyrogoyf again and let the Normalize on Reprieve resolve. And now it's time for the Titan. So we have the new Boros Legend entering the battlefield. By the way, a card that is quite revolutionary for the deck. It gives you a great upside in control against control decks. Also quite pivot against aggressive matchups once you cannot manage to get back your life with Aragorn. So a very welcome card after all. And he's exiling a few lands and creatures, and now there is it. That's a big Titan. I think at that point I drew... What did I... I had some spell that could turn the tide, I think. I also had a... Not sure if I had a counter spell ready here, but I think I had to resolve the TNN. I think I had another Unholy Heat, Strangle, something like this, to deal with a creature that's not True Name Nemesis. But that's a big wall. I have another land drop. And even a 4th Eolingas wouldn't do the job here. That would be a 4 for 5. That's only 10. He's blocking 2 creatures. So without any creatures on board, it would be lethal. But in this case, he will just take out 2 of them. And it would be 9 damage if I'm correct. So yeah, I'm looking at my chances. Doesn't look too good. And actually, I decided, well, there's no way out. And we just have to go over to game 3. And that's probably because I did this mistake with the days in the early rounds, trying to defend my TNN, but I was unable to counter the right target. I mean, now in hindsight, knowing that he had a Pyrogoyf ready, that would be a crazy interaction with Failure for sure. but in that very situation, as I said, it takes one attack for failure at least. So the TNN trades with failure. And then, yeah, you have a double Pyroglyph trigger, which is very powerful. But I also think at that point, the Pyroglyph was not that big. Maybe a 3-4 or something like this. So not too crazy. But well. Here we go. Wrath of the Skies was discussed on stream, I think, by Jan and Yiri. That's actually a card that I find interesting, especially because the Slimefoot matchup is hard to handle for Aragorn. So that might be a card that I'll try out. You can control the outcome. It has some, in that direction, it has a similar flexibility as Toxic Deluge. Of course, for more mana, but still. Also, I only play Portable Hole and Parallax Wave, so the amount of enchantments and artifacts that would be destroyed on my side is quite low. While this one can also, I mean, you can also cast it for only 2 white mana and get rid of tokens and Urza Saga and whatsoever. So it's not too bad. I will give it a try. End of turn, I cast a Kata Commando. That's my opportunity to get a lead in this situation. If my opponent can, they should probably handle it. Otherwise, I have a 3-1 that deals some damage turn by turn. We see a Surveil land. And I think there is a counterspell Mana Type or something. Or Force Spike was played, I'm not sure anymore. But it was a reaction to it. It was a Mana Type, okay. Back to my turn. We have a... I think I had a White Plume, and I thought, okay, this is the window to cast a White Plume. I just have to top deck a land. I top decked the land. It was Surveil land, unfortunately. But well, it was at least a land. I bin the Spell Snare because Spell Snare is not the best counter magic. I mean, there are a couple of spells that are CMC2, but yeah. If you're searching for lands, you don't want to have this card on top. Especially because it doesn't help me protect my White Plume cast next turn, since I have no other land in hand. That's also why I decide to cast a Reprieve on any target that I can get. Interestingly, my opponent decides to not play it again. Well, he wants to keep up interaction too. And I'm not sure if I think I drew a land, yeah. Here I drew a land, and then I try to cast the White Plume. I have a Force of Will backup for that. The White Plume resolves, and my opponent brings down a creature, I guess? Yeah, he has some interaction. So if he also has a Force of Negation or a Force of Will, it would be pretty crazy or quite a good play for him to let the White Plume resolve. I take the initiative. He has a flashy creature with which he can steal the initiative, and then for my Force of Will, he has a Force backup on its own. And here you see, pitching the Mantis Rider, that resolves, and I get to defend my initiative that way. And there are not that many hasty creatures. I'm not sure if he runs Mantis Rider, but that's on my side. That's the only hasty creature available. And now you have to get rid of the White Plume, because this thing is going to grow. And if it's at 5 power, this is pretty much a 3-turn clock, in addition to the trap trigger of the Undercity. So I think the Brainstorm found something. I'm not completely sure what it was. There were so many rounds played this day. Oh, actually, only 7 rounds. Not too many rounds, but still. So next turn, I would, if the White Plume stays on board, I venture into the left side. But there's a Flage dealing with the White Plume. That's a wise choice. So I decide to venture into the right side. End of turn, don't forget to fetch your surveil land. As we always say, the surveillance pretty much changed the dynamics of the early turns, at least if you have a fetch land on board. You don't see any more triomes in 3-colored decks, because fetching for the additional information or card quality is just better. So I'm not quite sure what was the play next turn. I think I have enough lands in hand. I can go for the scry. I think I had a Parallax Wave in hand, which is a great combination with all the emblems. Overall, a very, very powerful card. So, not quite sure if I had any interaction here, any counter magic or whatsoever. At that point, the judges are interrupting, saying, you guys are in extra turns already, but we took like 5+ minutes to move because we already had our stuff set up. And then they said, okay, you're going to play the feature match if you like. Okay, sure, we go over, but it costs at least 5 minutes. So we got some extra time, fortunately. And we just had to resolve that with the judges. So there's the planes that I searched with the White Plume. And then I can cast Aragorn and go for the double emblem magic. I think I had Oust and something else as a backup. So if he casts Aragorn himself, I can get rid of it again. But there is a Letharmantic Barrage again. Dealing with Aragorn, that's a good removal here. But I have double emblem available. I'm not sure. I think we had 5 minutes left on the clock plus extra turns. So far, I couldn't apply too much pressure. So I was a bit in a hurry to win that game in order to get a good standing. He decides to cast the Mastermind sorcery speed in his turn. As I said, I have the Parallax Wave ready. But again, there's no pressure applied, so I really have to find something. Maybe, I mean, there's a skeleton token coming next, and maybe the last stage of the Undercity will also find something. We have a Danik cast. I'm not too sure. I mean, I had some mana open, and I think I even had a counterspell, but this could have been an opportunity to cast Flage. Obviously not the best creature to cast when there is a Parallax Wave on board, but still, just making sure to not lose that game in a short period of time. But yeah, I'm still searching for some stuff. And then there was like debates about, okay, now the timer is gone and you have to go to extra turns. I decided to play the Absent on Danik, so he draws it again next turn. I don't want him to draw any answer against Parallax Wave or anything else. If Danik was the best play he could make last turn, he will likely do it again. And I just want to stall until I find something to win the game. The only card, so there's a Wash Away. That's the last card actually, and here's my counterspell to deal with the Wash Away. So now I know, okay, Danik will be the card in hand. He can decide to cast Flage, but as I said, it's not the most attractive target with a Parallax Wave on board. It would give him a double trigger, but he can just recast it at some point. So there's Danik. And then I took my library, and it seems like I looked like a bit under it at the card. So the judge was sitting right next to it. I was just about to stack the pile for the 10 cards, and I was like, okay, And then I had to reshuffle my deck because, I mean, nothing changed, and the top 10 were fully randomized anyway. So, okay, we just shuffled the deck. I got to see my 10 cards for the last trigger. Luckily for my opponent, the best target I could get down was Flage, which is directly sacrificed. There was also a subtlety, but I thought, well, if depending on my draw, I can have Flage, I can deal 3 damage to face, and then I cast it again, and then I have, in my last turn, I would have another 9 damage. And I think when I exile Danik, the P-Wave would still be up. Of course, the creatures would return, but yeah. So I thought this was the better target in comparison to Subtlety. I also have the Skeleton that would deal 4 damage now, so the Fledge could win the game. But I was kind of lucky because I drew a much better card, which would win me the game on spot. I thought, well, my opponent has nothing left in hand. He used his Wash Away to deal with the Unexpectedly Absent, which might have been a mistake, but obviously he wanted to do something else. And yeah, you see, I sort my mana. I also have a land for turn with the Hallowed Fountain. If you wonder, the Winter Peeve was cast last turn. And here I have a 4th Eolingas for X equals 7, which brings down 14 damage in addition to the skeleton, and that seals the deal. So it was quite a cool finish. It was a really nice game. I enjoyed it. My opponent was a nice guy, and I think we both had quite some fun. I hope you enjoyed that session, and we see each other in the next one. Bye bye.